Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our conversation on accessibility and ADA advocacy with leaders from 3 Nevada performing arts venues. My name is Erica Hill. I'm the Community Arts Development Specialist in Northern Nevada, and I'll be facilitating our conversation tonight. The Nevada Arts Council is committed to making art and culture accessible across the state and finding ways to increase accessibility and awareness of accessibility. In 2019, we began the IDEAS program to lead workshops in inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We continued these workshops online in 2021, but during the past year, as we have finally emerged from the pandemic as a fully staffed agency, we have done these workshops internally with our staff to better understand our own bias and identify where we can make ourselves more aware of our needs to address accessibility within our agency and to our constituents. We understand that the Nevada Arts Council plays a critical role in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in and through the arts. We know we must constantly challenge ourselves to reduce barriers and bias, making the arts central to the well-being and prosperity of all communities across Nevada. We are committed to advance inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility through our actions. Now we are developing programming in which we encourage conversations on these topics and facilitate opportunities to engage with these subjects. Tonight is the first program in a series in which we give platform to those with personal experiences and idea work. We recognize that tonight's panel is just the start of our conversation and programming we are developing on these topics. So, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce you to our speakers tonight, advocates of accessibility representing 3 different performing arts organizations in Nevada: Denise Sewell, Executive Director of the Pioneer Center; Melanie Jupp, Director of Education and Outreach at the Smith Center; Melissa Taylor, Executive Director of the Reno Little Theater; and Layla Lehrman, Chair of the Reno Little Theater's IDEA Committee. We will give each speaker 20 minutes to talk with us and follow it up with the questions and answers at the end. We will begin with Denise, followed by Melanie, and then close the night with Melissa and Layla. Now that we are moving on to our second presentation, Melanie, whenever you're ready to jump in, we're very excited to hear what you have to say and represent today.
Sure, thank you. I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, is it working?
Looking good.
Yes. First, before, I'll introduce myself first. My name is Melanie Jupp. I am the Director of Education and Outreach at the Smith Center for the Performing Arts in Las Vegas. We are also so honored to be here this evening and so grateful to be included. And Denise, that was a masterclass. You are so poised. And I was over here, I turned my camera off to do some like shake my sillies out. I was like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. She's saying everything. So it's really tremendous. Thank you so much. It was just the perfect way to tee up for what I will be talking about, which is sensory inclusive performances. So before I get lost in the weeds and start rambling, I'm going to try my best to stick to the slides. The thing that I want to acknowledge with sensory inclusive performances, just like Denise said, I am only an expert as far as my experience here has gone. I have certainly learned a lot over the years, and I continue to learn and certainly have expertise in facilitating this work in our organization and in our venues. But we also have friends that we rely on and organizations that we rely on to truly provide expertise that we lack as people who, as a person myself, who does not have a need for a sensory inclusive performance. We do our best to make sure that we are relying on those who can truly guide us. So no good presentation starts without some photos. These photos really highlight to me the joy of sensory inclusive programming. And I will tell you that for anyone who's considering sensory inclusive programming, the number one thing I can say is that you might benefit far more than your actual audience. You will learn so much about your organization. You will learn so much about what it means to be inclusive, and you will learn so much about what it means to be supportive of humans in this world. And as Denise mentioned often, and alluded to often, this is just how it should be. presenting sensory inclusive performances is a wonderful thing to do, and it takes a commitment of an organization, and it takes hard work. But it is the ideal. The ideal is, how do people enjoy performances in our spaces, and what can we do to help them do that? Okay. So for anyone who may not be familiar, this is a definition of sensory inclusive programming that we borrowed from our friends who put together the Sensory Inclusive Network. And I'm not going to read it out loud. I'm sure if we can share our slides, I'm happy to with the attendees. But I did underline the parts that are most important to me, which is that sensory inclusive programming includes physical and cultural modifications to a performance, and that the goal is creating a shared experience for an audience, regardless of one's abilities. So for us, we go more on the side of cultural modifications. We are a presenting house, similar to the Pioneer Center. We do not create the work. So it's up to us to create the environment where our guests will feel safe, they'll feel welcome, and they'll feel included. We don't get to say, occasionally a presenting house will have an opportunity to make recommendations for a show that's trying to design a sensory inclusive version. But we haven't had that opportunity yet. We hope we will someday. But physical also means just what you do in your physical environment in your venue. I also want to point out that I will be speaking from the perspective of theater performances, but sensory inclusive performances can be across arts disciplines. It can be any work of art that you're seeing performed live can have a sensory inclusive version of it, because again, if you're approaching it from the aspect of physical and cultural, you don't have to necessarily design something that is made specifically for people with sensory sensitivities. And there is a spectrum of what sensory inclusive work is. You have presenting organizations like ours who present work that's already created, but you can also have organizations and theater companies who do incredible work designing sensory inclusive performances specifically for people with sensory processing disorders, with sensory sensitivities, and a variety of needs. And there's some just fascinating, tremendous work that is happening in the world in this area. And I do have a slide later on with some tips to look into a few organizations. So who benefits from sensory inclusive performances? You will hear that it's people with a variety of diagnoses who benefit most from these performances. But the truth is, people without diagnoses, people of all walks of life, could have a need for this type of performance. I know plenty of people who do not have a diagnosis of anything on this bullet pointed list who have a hard time with loud in shows and have a hard time with flashing lights in shows. And it just goes to show you that everyone has needs that can be accommodated, or that can be designed for in the case of shows that are designed in this way, regardless of a diagnosis or not. And that's not to minimize the need for this work for people with these variety of diagnoses. It certainly absolutely makes sense, and we're happy to provide it for them. But just a nod to, we are all humans. You never know who might need this work. We don't do anything to ask people, do you really need to be here? Obviously, we can't ask them to divulge or identify anything that they may be diagnosed with. So it's I will be honest and say that sometimes I think people do see it as like, oh, it's a kids show because anything goes. But we're not in a position to say, do you really need to be here? Because for all we know, they absolutely do. And this is Mallory and her dog Lucy. And Lucy was at one of our performances dressed as a lion. And they come to most of our Broadway sensory inclusive shows. And Lucy is a good sport. She's always dressed up as something. So it did take us a while to get to this work. For anyone who is considering doing sensory inclusive programming, it also doesn't have to take this long. It took this long because we knew that as a Broadway touring house, we wanted our first big engagement to be a Broadway touring performance. And that takes a lot of intentional community building, a lot of fundraising, and a lot of time. So truly, our first interest came in 2013 in this exact office that I'm sitting in, We had two wonderful ladies from Touro University's Autism Clinic come in and say, we know that there are performances that are autism friendly. We know that they are Broadway performances. We know that you're going to do Broadway performances, and we want you to do autism friendly Broadway performances. And we said, okay, great, we want to too, but let's take some time to get there. So, excuse me. So we spent a few years building our programming in a variety of areas, and just trying to get to know the community in terms of how it interacts with the Performing Arts Center. We opened in 2012. We all had experience in this community, but not in the way in terms of how our community interacts with us. So we had to spend a few years getting to know everyone, getting to know our own organization, you know, developing our working relationship with our colleagues in fundraising, because they are a big part of this puzzle. And so we really started talking seriously about how we were going to do this in 2016. In 2017, we had some good idea that our first show would probably be The Lion King in a sensory-friendly format, which is what we called it then. Now we call it sensory inclusive. And that could be another 2-hour discussion on language, but it's a change that we just made this year, and we're sticking with it. We'll see how long we stick with this one and how the language evolves. But we did put together an advisory committee of people from various organizations in primarily Southern Nevada, but we did have representation from a few statewide organizations. We also made sure to include autism self-advocates, people who have autism and were comfortable advising us in terms of their experience and the experiences of maybe their friends. And they were there for us to absolutely fulfill the expert capacity in working with populations with disabilities, because we know the arts, we know community outreach, and we certainly had worked in some areas that included people with disabilities, but this is not our expertise, and we needed to make sure that we were relying on others to help us with that. So gosh, what did we do? I've practiced this numerous times, believe it or not, but there's just a lot to fit in. And I think what makes me the most amped up about these discussions is, like, there's so much to tell you, and I want to tell you all of it without missing anything, and I'm going to miss things. So I hope that in our Q&A portion, people will have questions, or they'll feel free to reach out later. But going back to the timeline, we do a lot of research in our department. We really like to learn from people who have done what we're trying to do, because they're going to have good advice for us. So I did have the opportunity to attend the autism-friendly performance of The Lion King on Broadway, as well as Wicked in Pittsburgh at the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust, where they were having the opportunity to give advice and request certain changes to the show. They had the first sensory inclusive performance of Wicked there, so that was a really cool process to see. And we ended up doing our very first sensory inclusive performance in April of 2018 with this amazingly beautiful work called We Have a Plan. It's from a company out of Northern Ireland called Cahoots NI, and their artistic director basically designs all of their shows to be inclusive for everyone. They aren't a company that says we design sensory inclusive work. They're a TYA, a Theater for Young Audiences company, but he designs everything with everyone in mind. And if anyone has ever read the book, We Have a Plan, you will know that it's very easy to read because it has one word, and that is the rest of it is pictures. And so the show itself does not include any language, which makes it really amazing for a sensory inclusive performance, because people who have sensory sensitivities or have a variety of diagnoses can sometimes either not communicate the same way you and I are communicating right now, or just appreciate a show that doesn't have a lot of language and a lot of distractions that you're trying to follow. So it was just a really tremendous performance for us to do as our very first show, and that was in our studio theater, which is about a capacity of 170 people max, but we probably only had 60 or so, which led us to our very first sensory inclusive performance of The Lion King, which was actually 4 years ago yesterday. Our former intern texted me and said, oh, it was 4 years ago. I was like, oh, geez, I already forgot the exact date, but it was an amazing day. It was a testament to the hard work that we had all put in together and that our team had put in together. And it absolutely goes down. I've been here at the Smith Center for 11 years, and it is absolutely one of the best days of my career here so far. So this is just a quick list of the sensory inclusive performances we have had over time. As you can see, most of them are in our studio theater, and those are usually going to be shows that are connected to our student matinee series. When we book a show that comes in for a Monday through Friday, and then we make sure that they have a sensory inclusive version that they can do for us on a weekend. And you'll notice we do have a sensory inclusive performance of Frozen coming up in March 2023. So this is a quick overview. I mean, like I said, there are so many things I could tell you about our process. I could tell you about the orientations we do before a show. I could tell you about how we chose our sensory friendly advisory committee members. I could tell you every single step of the way. It would take 2 hours, and I'm happy to do that for anyone who wants that. I'm happy to do that any other time. But this is just a high level overview of the cornerstones of our approach. And so, as I mentioned before, for us, sensory inclusive really means a supportive environment and a shared philosophy that everyone is here to be themselves, number one, and to enjoy a show, number two, and we are just here to make sure they can do that safely and in a way that they feel as supported as possible. So our shows do include expert support volunteers, which would be someone who might be a therapist, an educator in a special education classroom. Sometimes we've had physicians, registered behavior technicians, and anyone who works with people with disabilities. And that's really just to make sure that 99% of the time, your audience members are attending with people who can help them if they need something. And so we do not sit here and think that we're going to have to take care of situations that may arise. But if they do, we need to know that we have people who are trained to safely and respectfully handle those situations, and that we as a performing arts center staff are not trying to step outside of our area of expertise. And we do have a big pre-show training with every staff member, every volunteer, everyone who's working front of house, our parking attendants, everyone, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page and ready to have a good day together. The other really important aspect of our programming is that the tickets have to be a very affordable rate. There are absolutely people who have disabilities who don't need a $12 ticket, but the truth is that a majority of people do have additional expenses, and so they need their tickets to be accessible. They need to be priced in a way that they can afford to come. We also do tell everyone that we will offer refunds. For a Broadway show, we stay up until maybe 2 hours before curtain, but certainly for any show in our studio theater, no questions asked, we will refund you if you wake up that day and you can't come, if you start to drive here and you can't go in, if you get to the doors and it's too dark, it's too scary, whatever it may be, we will provide a refund, no questions asked. I'm gonna take a sip of water before this one, because this is a big one. When we offer a sensory inclusive Broadway touring performance, we do have to buy out the show that we're offering. So for a show, it's not written in the slideshow, but I will tell you verbally the numbers. For a show like The Lion King, we were responsible for fundraising and guaranteeing around $180,000 for one performance. And it's worth it, and we do it, and it's a wonderful thing to do. But it is a huge fundraising lift, and that is why you see that we only do them every couple of years, because it takes a while to regenerate those funds and get to a place where you can offer another one. It's certainly more expensive for Disney titles, I will say that. Other shows, especially if they're non-equity, will be more affordable. And of course, there are only a few of us who are Broadway presenting houses, so there are only a few of us who have to deal with this issue, but it is an issue and it's absolutely a barrier. And I do hope that as this work becomes more ubiquitous, it will also become more accessible for the organizations who want to do it, because that's a huge barrier. It's a huge barrier. And we do thankfully have the support of our organization in making this happen for our community. But I would be remiss to not tell you that we do sometimes question what else could we do with this money? Could we develop something that's a little more sustainable, that has a little bit more of a lasting impact? Not that we don't want families to come and have an amazing and memorable day, but we do think about like, okay, what does this look like if we weren't investing this in one showtime? And then the last piece is just, people ask us all the time, how do you advertise? And the truth is, when you're spending $180,000 just to have the show and set your ticket prices, which is how we're able to do that, we don't have an advertising budget. There's nothing that we can do to put together more of an advertising budget. So we tend to benefit off of the advertising dollars that our marketing team is already putting out into the community. But it's also just a lot of audience development work, truly. It's going into the community, it's going to community events, it's meeting people and families and putting a face to our name, putting their worries at ease, letting them know that they can trust us, that we're not just saying, oh, we're doing a sensory inclusive show, you should come on down. We try to tell them, and just by being invited by the organizations that we partner with to be present in these spaces, they learn that they can trust us. So it's really word of mouth, marketing to our database, marketing to previous attendees, and going to community events. This is just for the sake of anyone who would like to see. These are some of the organizations who have helped us throughout our process, and they continue to advise us now if we have questions. We used to meet formally, but now it's just like send emails or pick up the phone and call. We thankfully are at the point where we can just pick up the phone and call, and they can likewise do the same with us. We did have the benefit of national mentorship opportunities as well. One of the ones that I could spend so much time talking about is Kevin Spencer, and I really encourage anyone who wants to do work with an artist in the area of disability and in so many other areas. He is seriously a jack of all trades, a former professional magician who is part of that Sensory Inclusive Network website that I referred to. But we are bringing him to Las Vegas for a visit at the end of January. So if anyone wants to come see what he's doing while he's here, we would welcome you to come to any of his workshops. Just some more good pictures. This is who really makes it happen. I mean, there's of course our team in our offices doing the planning, doing the work every day, but when it comes down to it, these volunteer crews are what help to set that environment. And it is a combination, you know, in our large hall in Reynolds Hall, we do have a combination of paid and volunteer ushers, but we also have additional community volunteers who are there to be welcoming and a smiling face and a warm presence. We also have a variety of therapists who help us in that pre-show training, just to kind of share some of their expertise and encourage people that if they should have a question arise, that they are there to help them, and they don't need to try to solve problems that they may not be able to solve. And we have a planned picture. We always laugh because it just looks funny, but it was a beautiful day and a great crew of people. So these are some of our outcomes. As I mentioned, you know, while the families and the individuals are of course the ones who are benefiting from the opportunity to come and have a day that is judgment-free, is a phrase that is used often. Honestly, I teeter back and forth on that because I don't like to imply that every other situation is full of judgment, even though we know that is often the case. So a lot of sensory inclusive or autism friendly or relaxed performances will say come to a judgment-free environment, and that's wonderful, and families absolutely feel so comforted by that. But it is, I hope that they can come to a judgment-free environment anytime they walk through our doors. It shouldn't just be when they're coming for a sensory inclusive performance. So these are some of our outcomes. Again, we really benefit so much from doing this work because we see all the ways that we can apply so many of these principles in all of our programming. And I do really hope, I try all the time to tell everyone on our staff when they say like, oh, we do sensory inclusive performances, it's so great. And I say, yes, it is great. And the best part about it is I hope that the people who are coming to these performances are developing the skills and the confidence in themselves to come here anytime they want to. We want them here anytime. And thankfully, through the design of our building and through our commitment to accessibility, we do have a variety of accessible options for enjoying performances here. And all of those options are also offered during a sensory inclusive performance. So we will have American Sign Language, we will have audio description, we will have eye caption, and of course our accessible seats and anything else that someone may need to enjoy the show. We always have headsets around just in case, even though most people bring their own. So yeah, we really benefit from the work. We don't benefit financially whatsoever. Any revenue that we earn goes into that buyout, and that's it. We look forward to fundraising for the next one, but our outcomes in terms of learning and continuing to improve are just great every single time we do one of these. So these are some excellent organizations to look into who do have true expertise in this area. Oily Cart is one in the UK that designs sensory theater that is just truly wonderful. Trusty Sidekick did an amazing show called Up and Away that was designed for an audience of 12. So that's that model of like more of a one-to-one, where the whole experience is created with the person and their needs in mind. And I won't read the rest of them, but please feel free for anyone who just wants to be inspired by what some other organizations are doing around the country and around the world. There is no end to the creativity that can happen in this space when people just care about making theater accessible. And that brings us to the end. This photo is one of my favorite photos of all time. It is also from We Have a Plan. It's the very end when their environmental theme, their journey comes to pass, and a shower of paper butterflies rains down. And yes, your crew has to clean up all those butterflies at the end of every show. But it's just such a magical moment. It's worth it for everyone. So you can check out our website as well for information on our upcoming sensory inclusive performances. We do have 2 in our studio theater, one in January, one in February, and then Frozen is in March. And we truly do, for anyone who's considering doing this work, we truly invite you to come see the show with us, experience it as a community volunteer, and we're happy to help you in any way we can. Thank you so much.